Hello and welcome. Today, I'm joined by John Rodman, founding partner of CRM Law in Savannah, Georgia. John spent 8 years as a public defender before making the jump to private practice. In this episode, we are diving into the CEO transition of how John moved from a three-way partnership to taking the reins of the firm solo while relocating offices and modernizing systems. We will also talk about John's unique feeder program for talent and how he triages the thousands moving parts of a growing law business. John, welcome to the Growth Switch.
Thank you, Alex. Happy to be here.
Now, you didn't have a very traditional beginning to your career. You were in the military and you studied journalism and philosophy before that as well. Do you want to take us through your journey to where you are today?
I think what might have set me apart from a more traditional move towards lawyering is that I wasn't a very good student in high school. And so because of that, I didn't finish high school with a bunch of scholarship offers. And so I joined the military in order to get to college and served there in the infantry before moving on. And turns out the military gave me all the discipline I needed to hunker down and figure out what a good student was. And so from there, I did finish law school. And once I got to law school, I kind of immediately gravitated towards criminal defense, and the natural best transition to kind of cut my teeth in the criminal defense world was to join the public defender's office and spent 8 years there.
Apart from that discipline that you are talking about from the military, what are some of the lessons that you took over to the legal practice that still influences how you practice today?
I think the five P's, prior planning prevents poor performance, was certainly a military philosophy that has stuck with me. But, I think also just being exposed to the hardships that come with military service, particularly infantry service, it kind of gave me a perspective of no matter how bad things get, I'm out here in the civilian world outside of the weather and with 3 square meals available. And it kind of made the normal comforts of life feel even more comfortable.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I feel like the hardships that a lot of people might struggle with are just something that don't quite feel like hardships. So
Hmm.
that was, I think, a big benefit for me.
I think I heard that some veterans actually find it harder to succeed in business environment because there are many moving parts and there is not the same structure as there is in the military, and they actually perceive, military being relatively easier because of that structure, as a easier time in their life. Would you agree with that sentiment, or?
I don't disagree with that sentiment. I mean, I will say, I think, and, knowing a lot of veterans myself, I think a lot of us share a belief that it does take some years following military service to kind of transition back into the civilian world, because the civilian world is a lot less structured. Leadership roles are more abstract a lot of times. So, maybe there's more room for creativity, which can be foreign for someone who is so used to a structured environment.
Mhm.
So, I can certainly identify with the idea that it can be a difficult transition, because I'll tell you, I've probably been out of the military for 5 or 6 years before I felt like civilian life was normal.
Tell us a little bit about your time as a public defender. What were your highs and lows of the 8 years that you were doing it?
So, the highs were just being in the courtroom almost every day. I really have a love of litigation. I enjoy my time in the courtroom. I enjoy being an advocate in the courtroom for my clients. And so just having that experience of constantly being out there on the front line, so to speak, really, I think, accelerated my growth as a litigator and as a lawyer, handling so many cases day in and day out. It was, I remember when I joined the public defender's office, I told my boss who was hiring me, take me out of the frying pan and throw me into the fire. And little did I know how true that statement would end up being in that world, because you are in the fire every day. And so it, as I think I said earlier, it really helped me sharpen my teeth, so to speak.
Mhm.
as to litigation. The downsides were you don't get to choose your cases like you do in the private world to some extent. I can kind of choose who I want to take on as a client, whereas in the public defender world, you take all comers and you deal with a lot of mental health clients, which can be difficult, and you deal with a lot of cases with a lot of bad facts, which also are difficult. And if you have an unreasonable client that wants to take a terrible case to trial, you're stuck with it. So, that was part of the motivation for moving to private practice, is just so that I could kind of focus on the clients and the cases that I wanted to focus on and felt like I could offer the most help on.
Do you have any mentors or people that influenced your career during that period that you were very close with?
Absolutely. I think anyone who is planning to become a lawyer is going to struggle immensely if they don't latch on to mentors as much as possible. Michael Edwards was the CPD or the circuit public defender, my boss, who hired me in the public defender's office. I have maintained a steady relationship with him over the last better part of 2 decades. He's been a major mentor, taught me a lot of what I know as far as being a litigator in the courtroom. My former law partner and very good friend, Chris Middleton, who's now a Superior Court judge and has just gone through the stratosphere with his legal career, has also been a mentor of mine. My other law partner, Fallon Cox, has been a mentor and taught me a lot of things. We have different skill sets, and so being connected with her in the way that we were through the law firm really exposed me to different ways of doing things, looking at things, organizing things. And then there's a number of mentors even beyond that, senior level attorneys from the public defender's office and some of my colleagues in the private bar. It's very much a teamwork approach, at least the way I do it. I'd never hesitate to pick up the phone and call a colleague who might have dealt with some similar case or situation. So the mentors are really too numerous to name, and I utilize them probably nearly on a daily basis. So, my advice to any attorney is make connections, maintain them, and never be afraid to ask questions, because somebody always knows more than you do, depending on the situation you're dealing with.
I think some of that is being very intentional about looking for help and being proactive. I think we have lately lost a skill of saying I don't know to many things, and I feel like it's good to have those moments when you're proactively seeking the help, because like you said, somebody might know a lot more, and it's good to seek that advice. Among your colleagues
of AI, a lot of people are thinking they can be more self-sufficient by leaning on AI to kind of tell them what to do, and in my opinion, there's just really no good substitute for actual experience. I'm a little slow on getting into the whole ask AI for anything. I really prefer to go to a live body and a mentor who's actually been in it and done it and can give me some experienced advice.
Certainly. Do you think there is any bad advice out there that comes from maybe best intentions and experience, but maybe something changed and some of that wisdom is not quite up to speed maybe with the modern practice?
There's plenty of bad advice out there. And that's probably true in any career field. There's as much bad advice as there is good, and part of the challenge is filtering through the bad to find the good. One thing that immediately comes to mind for me, it's advice that I hear given all the time, and I've always actually hated it. And I was given the advice as a brand new lawyer, and that's the whole fake it till you make it approach. I have always not liked that advice at all. I understand the philosophy of it, but it kind of goes back to what you say about, being willing to say, I don't know, or can you give me some guidance? I remember as a young lawyer, so many lawyers out there said, fake it till you make it. And what that becomes is when your client starts asking you questions about your experience level or what you know or don't know, I think there's this idea that you're supposed to bolster their confidence by bolstering your reputation. Say, oh yeah, I'm so much better and I have so much more experience than I really have. And I very quickly, pretty much immediately realized that was terrible advice. And, first 2-3 years as a lawyer, when my clients would ask me that inevitable question of, have you handled a case like this before? Or how many trials have you had? I very quickly learned to just be honest. No, I haven't handled something like this. I've only had a few trials, and I think in being honest, that opens up communication and actually, in maybe a counterintuitive way, builds trust. Because I think the whole fake it till you make it thing is about this idea of people will trust you if they believe that you know more than you know. And I find it to be just the opposite. If you're
Mm,
honest and you aren't afraid to say, I don't know, I'll look it up, I'll talk to someone, I'll find out, I think you're going to go a lot farther with that.
100%. I think it's always better to underpromise and overdeliver than to promise a fantastic outcome if the person making the promises actually don't know what they're talking about, and that's not what will happen.
It's
That leads to a lot
ultimately
more
the difference
disappointment.
between a good reputation and a bad reputation, in my belief. I know I take on clients from many other attorneys who've left that attorney to come to me, and that's always their biggest complaint. They
Mm,
overpromised, they oversold themselves, they said they could do something that they couldn't do or wasn't even possible. Whereas I take your approach, and I much prefer to underpromise and overdeliver, and you end up with happier clients that way, and you end up with better results on cases that way.
absolutely. John, you mentioned your partners already. What was the shift? What made you to switch from the public defenders and together with your partners to start your own practice?
Well, in my 8 years as a public defender, myself and both of my partners developed very good reputations as lawyers. And, in part because of that, I know all three of us were constantly being approached by people in the community with legal needs saying, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And as a public defender, you can't. You can only handle your assigned cases. And I think for all three of us, we kind of got tired of telling people we can't help you. We're stuck with where we are. And so we decided it was time to branch out and join the private bar where we could help the people who wanted to come to us for help. And so that's what we did. I mean, that was probably the primary motivation, was just being able to get out there and help the people who were always asking for help, but we couldn't help. And
Mhm.
that's kind of what spawned the idea of let's go out and start a firm and make ourselves available.
Do you think you would have started the practice by yourself, or was that the element that you were doing it together as a group and you were complementing each other's skills and it was an easier transition because of that?
I think it was a much easier transition because of the partners. It was something that I would have wanted to do by myself. Would I have? I guess I'll never know.
Hmm.
But it was definitely a benefit for the three of us to all go out and do this thing together, because one thing law school does not prepare you for is running a business. It can teach you a lot of different things about being a lawyer, but as far as being a business person, if you don't have that business background from undergraduate or life experience elsewhere, the business part becomes very difficult. And so for the three of us, none of us really having much of a business background, it was very important for us, since we were kind of building from the ground up, to go
Hmm.
out and lean on each other and kind of take a triage approach to everything and say, all right, we're going to divvy up tasks. You research this, you research that, I'll research this, and let's come back together. I mean, the first number of years that we were in the firm, we were having multiple meetings a week trying to figure this business thing out and how best to tackle marketing and just getting
Hmm.
out there and making things work. It was pure trial and error. We made way more mistakes on the business side than we had successes. A lot of
Hmm.
things we maybe tried 4 or 5 or 6 different things before we found something that kind of worked. And then we just kind of went with the kind of work stuff until we found something better. So having partners made a world of difference for me, for sure.
Hmm.
Now being solo, I'm still finding things to perfect or improve pretty much daily. And
Hmm.
that's really kind of the downside of running a law firm, is that you're so consumed with the business side of things that it kind of takes away from the lawyering, or your time for the lawyering, which is really the part that I love.
How do you, if you could elaborate on the triage aspect, from all the things that might require your attention right now, plus all the things that maybe you are thinking about improving in the business of law, how do you go about selecting what should get your attention right now and be a top priority?
Well, I mean, number one is easy. I mean, number one is always the client, the cases in front of me. You know, Michael Edwards, who I referenced earlier as a mentor, told me
Mhm.
very early on, you got to have a hot box, a warm box, and a cold box of action items, so to speak. And the clients and the cases are always in that hot box. That's always number one. As a result, the business part kind of is always running. But for me, it tends to run more in the background, which means I don't make the business moves as quickly as I would like in a perfect world. I mean, I know a lot of attorneys, especially, personal injury attorneys that you see on TV or on billboards. Most of them don't really even practice law. They focus on the business 100% of the time, and they hire attorneys to do the work underneath them,
Mhm.
which, kudos to them that they have the ability to do that. But being a more of a community based firm, myself and my partners, we were always focused on handling the cases, which does make it more difficult to manage the business, and make all those moves and explore all those options for different applications that you'd like to put the time in on, but the clients have to come first. And
Mhm.
down at the bottom is where all the marketing and everything is. I mean, our firm, my firm now, has always been word of mouth marketing because frankly, we don't have the time and attention to put into a whole lot of marketing. And what's interesting to me is I see a lot of these firms, especially the smaller firms that do focus a lot on marketing. I feel like affects their ability to be lawyers because there's only so many hours in the day. There's only so much bandwidth for any person. And so every moment you're dedicating to something like marketing is a moment you're not spending on your cases and your clients. But that's always number one for me.
And do you think so? Some of the things were made easier for you because you had partners when you started. Do you think for the firm that is starting to build their reputation, they don't have the book of business, they should have somebody entirely different from managing partner or one of the senior partners focusing on the marketing? Because to your point, they will not have the time to do it properly. And it's you either do it properly or you don't do it at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. For us, Miss Cox kind of took on the managing partner role early on, and Mr. Middleton did a lot of managing partnering, throughout periods of time as well. I only really took all that stuff over when I had to, because I was always more focused on the courtroom aspects. But yeah, I mean, I think you got to have someone, whether it's an office manager or a dedicated managing partner, to kind of focus on the day-to-day operation of the firm and the business aspect, because it's consuming that stuff. I mean, it's 8-hour days just on the business side. So,
Mhm.
I definitely recommend anyone who has the resource to have a person dedicated to that, do that.
And I would probably also add that sometimes when lawyers and other professionals talk about marketing, the first thing that comes to mind is advertising, the billboards, the TV ads. That's usually top of mind. But marketing can be many things, and even being part of a community and actively engaging with the people that end up referring business, that's also technically part of marketing. Now, you have some very interesting initiatives as well of how you do that. Do you maybe want to talk more about those?
Sure. And I agree with you, but I would call it more branding.
Hmm.
It tomato maybe, but I think marketing to me is something
Hmm.
that you're putting money and investing money and time and efforts into, as far as, painting yourself in the best light, so to speak. Whereas to me, branding is more about jumping out on initiatives and being involved in the community in ways that matter to you and hopefully matter to the community. And so, yeah, my partner Chris Middleton and I, long before we left the public defender's office, were involved in a lot of school initiatives, along with former colleague Bill Lewis. We started a program called I Wish I Knew, where through the duration of that program, we visited probably hundreds of schools, community centers, is pretty much anywhere youth of any age range might congregate. And we gave numerous know your rights type speeches, how to stay out of trouble, type bullying, giving advice on, the dangers of things like sexting. It depended on the age of the group as to what the advice was.
Hmm.
but be careful of your peers, be careful what cars you ride in. This is what the law really says, whereas this is what it says on the streets, which is not accurate. So we really went out and tried to put information out there. I mean, I think for all of us, we kind of got tired of dealing with a bunch of youth on the back end who were facing serious felony charges, and almost to a person, they're all saying, well, I wish I knew. I wish I knew that this could be such a problem. And so that's where we started the I Wish I Knew initiative, to try and get out in front of that and save some youth on the front end, which I think we did over the years. All of the partners were constantly involved in nonprofits, all sorts of boards. We try to be out there. I'm in Rotary. We try to be out there and just be involved in the community and give back, so to speak, which does become part of our brand. And like you said, does sort of function as a form of marketing. And that's really the only marketing that we've ever engaged in, truth be told. We haven't really done much of any traditional marketing, so to speak.
It worked for you, so don't change something that's working. What was the hardest part? Because obviously you cannot be in all places at once. Once you saw that pattern, that a lot of future clients, they said, we knew that, and you started the initiative, I'd imagine it could be very time consuming, and at times maybe it gets repetitive. What was the hardest part about ongoing spread of that good information to make sure that everybody in the community always have the right message and the right education in front of them?
I mean, I think it's all about priorities because, as you say, I mean, and as I said, there's only so many hours in a day. And as you say, there's only so much of you to go around. So, I mean, you got to focus on what's important to you. I mean, I think for us, speaking for myself and my former partners, we were interested in doing something that was good for our mental health, frankly. We deal with disaster as criminal defense attorneys in particular, but really attorneys in general. You're dealing with a lot of picking up the pieces of broken lives, broken situations. And so it's kind of nice to get out there and do something that can have a proactive, positive impact. I think it was good for us and good for the community as well to spread the knowledge. So it's not that we didn't get anything out of it. It's beneficial to us to be able to feel good about just trying to make the world a better place, so to speak.
Certainly, that makes a lot of sense. And I think another initiative that we spoke about before is your internship program, which I also found quite interesting in the way how you incorporated that in the business. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that as well.
Sure. So it kind of in the vein of the mentorship. Because I've benefited so much from the mentors I've had, there comes a point in your career, I'm coming up on, I think, 19 years in as a lawyer, where it's kind of time to give back. Now I've learned some things that some young attorneys or upcoming or future attorneys can benefit from. And I think it's important to give as much or more than you receive. And so the internship program was something, as a public defender, Michael Edwards was big on the internship program. We had interns from England and all over the place really coming in constantly. And, Chris Middleton was kind of the front runner of saying, hey, we got to have an internship program. If we're going to start this firm, we got to get it up and running right away. We did. We had interns that first summer. We started in January 2017 with the firm. By summer of 2017, we had interns in. We've had a steady rotation of them from various levels of education and from various places. We have interns that come in from England as well. We have high schoolers, undergraduates, law school students who come in with an interest in the law. And we probably have anywhere from 3 to half a dozen interns every year. And in fact, my administrative assistant, who really wears the hat of office manager these days, was in our first intern class with the firm. And so she's stuck with us ever since. Not only have we been able to kind of give back and try to mentor people, but it's also a great place to develop talent. She's been fantastic, and she started as an intern with us. And now I don't know how I could run the firm without her help.
Mm,
So, for people running a law firm, bringing some interns in can also be a great place to find future employees.
certainly. With the colleague that you mentioned, it's interesting how that worked out. Do you have anybody else as an example that went through internship program that left, the biggest impact on you and your career in maybe the way of how they joined or something that they did?
Sure. So we've had interns who've gone on to do really great things. One of our former interns went on to law school after the internship with us and ended up winning all sorts of awards. I believe he graduated at the top of his class. He's now making big money at a personal injury firm in Alabama. We've had interns that have gone on to become public defenders or assistant district attorneys and just work in various capacities all across the state of Georgia and beyond the state of Georgia. So we have really enjoyed keeping up with our interns and watching how they've gone on to shine in their careers. And it's really nice when I'm venturing into a court in another jurisdiction and I happen to run into a former intern who's working in that courtroom and being able to reconnect with them and hear what they have to tell me. And it's always nice when they say something about how the internship helped them out. So it's a great form of networking too, especially when
Sure.
your interns go on to do great things.
Yeah, certainly. It's good for business, and like you said, it's good for the soul as well. So
Absolutely.
positive impact all around. I know that your firm currently going through some changes as well. So you've transitioned into the sole ownership and you're also going through the move as well, which I'm sure comes with its set of challenges. How are you navigating right now, something that's with all the work and staying busy with the normal cases and having those changes on top of that? What is your plan to go through the phase?
Well, I don't know how many times I've said everything all at once lately because it really seems that way. Transitioning from the partnership to the sole proprietorship, physically moving offices. We have also, it just kind of all worked out to where we transitioned to various new applications. We changed almost everything, trying to streamline, trying to consolidate. Part of it is no longer having partners to lean on. So I really need to streamline everything. I mean, we did everything from switching bank accounts with different banks, and it's all kind of happened at once. But sometimes, progress is painful, and you just have to do what you need to do to progress, to be better for yourself and for your clients and for your staff and everybody. So yeah, we're undergoing a lot of changes right now. I could not do it without Miss Bynes, my office manager, who I referenced earlier, former intern, who has just taken on an immensely helpful role for me, which allows me to keep going into court and handling all the cases and preparing for trials and everything else because I've got her to kind of lean on in the background. There's that saying about no man being an island, and it's very true, especially when you're trying to run a business and handle cases in court and everything else. You really need a good support staff behind you, and I'm blessed to have one.
That's the team makes like massive difference for any endeavors, especially when there are changes. One of the things I want to ask, John, about the changes as well. In my understanding, having a military background, there are a lot of tradition involved in that. The things are done a certain way because usually there's a good reason behind it. In legal sector, especially when we have partners, we also have a tendency of doing things a certain way because that's what works. And especially if you spend years perfecting and going through trial and error, like you mentioned before, to establish those rules. How do you continue thinking about making some changes in the future to make sure that you're always doing what's best without necessarily, falling to a default setting of we've always done it this way, so we will just continue doing it that way?
That's a great question. And for me personally, I mean, you might get different answers from different people, but for me personally, I believe tradition is important. I believe preparation is key. And tradition, stare decisis is a legal term,
Hmm.
is important in that regard. But I have always said and will continue to always say, I believe that the most important skill that an attorney can have, and I think a business person too, is adaptability. I mean, you have to be willing and able to adapt to changing circumstances because the one constant in life is change. And so while tradition is great and there is a lot of real truth behind the, if it's working, don't fix it. Or if it's not broke, don't fix it. If it's working, don't change it. But at the same time, you have to have an eye towards progress. You have to understand that even if this way works, it doesn't mean there's not a better, more streamlined, more productive approach out there. And so I think you always have to be creative in every approach, whether it's how to handle a case or how to run a business. And so to me, adaptability is always my watchword. And so every day is about exploring new options because you just never know. I mean, even though this has worked a lot of times before, it doesn't mean it's going to work tomorrow. I don't think I've ever, I know attorneys out there who have kind of a standard pattern approach to cases. They say, oh, well, this is an armed robbery case. This is how I handle armed robbery cases. This is the general basic layout of a plan for it. And I've never really taken that approach. To me, every case is different. Every client is different. Every situation is different. And I think you got to kind of look at business the same way. Just because I tried this type of case this way the last time I was in front of a jury does not mean that's going to be met with success next time. And the same thing with business. Just because it worked last month, just because last month was a banner month financially doesn't mean I can do the same thing this month and think it's going to pay off the same way.
I think it's very helpful to be aware of our shortcuts mentally and biases when it comes to certain work. Do you have maybe an example of a mental model or something that you believe to be true, and then through that experience of always looking at every case individually, that you learn to maybe to break some of the past, the way maybe you approach the client work or something else in the business of law that used to be a default settings, and now because you saw many times that's not the case, you change your perspective about it?
Well, I don't know that I've ever really relied on default settings that much. For me, one thing that I do that I think, I hear from clients and prospective clients is different from maybe the way a lot of other attorneys approach taking on a case or discussing situations with clients, is that I always like to start an initial conversation with a prospective client with tell me about yourself type of approach. Hey, before we get into this whole situation you've got and what you need me to try and do for you, just let's talk and let me get to know you some. And what you'll learn is that there's a personality type there, and it's not necessarily a pattern personality type. Everyone's an individual with different needs, different belief systems, and every situation, there's a limited number of statutes out there. There's hundreds of thousands of them, but there's still a limited number. But just because someone is charged, you got 100 people charged under the same type of statute, they may be 100 different cases. They generally are. The motivations are going to be different. The personalities involved, from witnesses to complaining witnesses to the defendants, are all going to be different. And so it just, for me, I don't think it took long. And maybe it was the volume I was handling as a public defender and just all the different people I was encountering and talking to. It didn't take me long to realize that patterns weren't really a thing to be relied on when it came to looking at individual cases, because while I've handled tens of thousands of cases, I can't really say that any two of them were the same. There are some where, this case echoes within this other one. This case this case from 10 years ago reminds me of this current case, but they're still different. People are different. Situations are different.
That being able to adopt comes through in all aspects of the work, certainly. If there is one thing that you could improve in your practice, or maybe you have a big goal set for 2020, continue testing and improving one aspect of the business, what would you pick as the main thing to focus for you?
Well, I'm not sure there's one thing right now. I'm trying to purchase an office space, which I think will provide maybe a more permanent kind of stable structure for the business. I have a strong desire to bring additional personnel in, the right personnel, to expand the ability to take on more cases and handle more clients. So, team building is very important. Right now, in this moment, I'm very focused on just streamlining everything and making things run as efficiently and effectively as possible. And then eventually, it would be nice to be able to focus on some level of marketing as well. But for the time being, I mean, the most important thing is maintaining the stellar reputation that the firm has by increasing productivity, reach, and our ability to continue to over deliver on expected outcomes.
When it comes to over delivering, what does that look like for you? If you had to set a very high standard, and again, I'm sure with the military background, you probably have very, very high standard. What do you think lawyers today, and you mentioned some of the law firms that focus heavily on the business of law, not enough on practice of law, maybe they fall short of that. Lawyer that exceeds expectations in 2026 looks like for you?
Well, I remember one of my early mentors, Bill Lewis, who I believe I mentioned earlier, told me very early in my career that in criminal defense in particular, you kind of have to redefine what victory means, because you're obviously not going to go in and win every case, nor should you. But what it really means is you have to recalibrate your expectations for what a realistic result is in a case. And so when it comes to exceeding expectations with clients, I think the most important element there is to set reasonable expectations with the clients on the front end. So for instance, when I have a prospective client who says, this is the case I want to hire you on. Okay, well, let's talk about the facts. Let's look at the evidence. Let's look at our options here. And then going back to being honest, not faking it till you make it, just being candid. I think it's important from the start to say, all right, well, this is the way I see it. I mean, I think this is what victory looks like for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need to, along with me, embrace this idea of a different definition of victory, because, for you, we're looking at best results always with everyone, really. And so for you, best results most realistically fall somewhere, between here and here. And as long as that client has set and accepted realistic expectations, now it's on me to try and deliver those expectations. And I think that's how you get you achieve and maintain a solid reputation, is just by being honest and then delivering the work necessary to get to those realistic expectations.
I think that's great advice. And for me, having the privilege of talking to business owners from different backgrounds, from law and from other professional services as well, it's interesting how there are almost, laws of physics in business as well, how some things are similar. And what you just described, managing expectations and having clear definition of what victory would look like, is super important. And from our side, we see the same with success or failure in marketing. Oftentimes, there is no clear definition of what victory would look like. That leads to bad expectations. For example, firm that never advertise expects to have their first $1 million case from advertising within a month, which is just not realistic.
Right.
But if there are incremental steps and they being talked about, so everybody knows exactly what to expect, what's reasonable, what's not reasonable, and what progress looks like, then you build a long-term success, and you build a reputation for the client, you build a reputation for the firm doing the work, and everybody's better off. So I
I
think
agree. I think it's important in any job that anyone can ever work, really. I mean, a server at a restaurant, if they're going around telling every customer, every diner at every table, oh, this is the most amazing dish you'll ever taste, I mean, you're going to have a lot of disappointed diners. But if you're setting reasonable expectations, well, this is much more savory, this is much more sweet. If you enjoy something fruity, you should go with this dish. Now, I mean, you're a better server, right? And it's true really in any business. And you're right. I mean, I think, especially for someone who's never engaged in marketing, you think you're going to go out and get just exponential returns. Well, if I spend, $1,000 on marketing here, I can expect a $10,000 return. And it's just not the case, right? Because You got to factor in the timeline, the reach, the type of marketing device. There's all sorts of, the level of competition in the immediate area. There's a lot of factors to consider at all times, right? And so you need
Absolutely.
someone who's familiar with the ins and outs to kind of help guide the way, right? And so that's kind of how I look at what I do and I tell all my clients my primary objective, my ultimate objective may be, depending on your situation, to litigate the case in front of a jury. But my primary objective before we ever get there is to just put the best options on the table and let you make the decision that suits you the best once I've fully informed you and allowed you to make an educated decision on what's in your best interest, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. John, where can our audience learn more about the work that you do and to learn more about the firm?
Sure. Well, our website is, first of all, you can Google CRM Law, which is the name of the firm. And our website is www.crmattorneys.com, or they can Google me, John Rodman, Savannah, Georgia. We have a pretty good web presence, a lot of client reviews out there. So, as a matter of fact, I'd say that's how we get the majority of our business. When people call, it's either from a direct referral of a former client or a colleague, or because they say, "Hey, we looked you up and we love the reviews, and so we wanted to sit down and talk with you and see what you had to say."
Perfect. And we'll make sure to include the links as well. So anybody that wants to find you, they can easily do so in the show notes. Perfect. John, thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you, Alex. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.